Once a representation of strength and solidarity on their cherished farm, the Roloff family was now facing their most trying time. After a protracted and difficult process, Amy and Chris Roloff had finally finalized their divorce. The sadness and unsaid tension that pervaded the air at Roloff Farms made everything feel heavy. Amy sat by herself on the porch, staring off into space as she thought back to her better days. Although the choice to split up was painful, both parties understood that it was essential for their own health and their family's future. Fractures had deepened behind the placid scenery. Chris Marek's arrest was a shocking and frightening event that rocked the family shortly after the divorce was announced. The farm was encircled by police cars with bright lights, which attracted worried family members outside with shocked and perplexed expressions. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Hope you are well. Please do subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up. Quickly spreading rumors with hazy yet sinister details had everyone wondering how things had gotten so out of hand. Emotions ran high in the household. Zach, the son of Matt and Amy, approached Chris in a fit of rage and disillusionment, unable to make peace with the man he had previously respected and who was now causing him trouble. Chris vigorously defended himself, claiming that there was more to the story, but his statements did little to calm the widening divide. Amy, divided between defending her family and confronting unpleasant realities, sobbed silently and pleaded with everyone to choose healing rather than further strife. Once a close-knit group, the family felt brittle and split. Amy shared the burden of the heartbreak and the difficult effort of repairing trust and picking up broken pieces with her daughter Molly during private moments. Molly's innocent optimism stood in stark contrast to Amy's burdened reality, but it served as a reminder that recovery was yet possible. Meanwhile, courtrooms distant from the tranquil exterior of the farm were the scene of custody and asset partition disputes. The finalization of the divorce was only the first step in months of financial and emotional consequences. The procedures were clouded by Chris's arrest, which made the family feel much more bereaved. There were times when the family attempted to unite despite the chaos. They were gathered around the table for an uncomfortable dinner, the tension heavy yet punctuated by hesitant attempts at reconciliation. Matt reminded everyone of their common past and the value of helping one another out for the benefit of their offspring and future generations. The Roloff family was at a crossroads as the sun sank over the farm, bathing the fields in a warm, golden glow. They were broken, hurt by sorrow and betrayal, yet below it all was a resolute spark of will. If anything, this marked the start of a new, uncertain chapter in their narrative, which was far from over. Months before the divorce was formally announced, the Roloff family's world had been slowly falling apart, but as soon as the papers were signed, it was impossible to ignore the fractures. Once the epitome of grace and fortitude on the family farm, Amy Roloff was now torn between resolution and pain. The fields she had loved all her life were illuminated by the early morning light as she sat on the old porch, but the warmth of the sun was insufficient to overcome the frost that was settling deep inside her. The pleasures, the hardships, and the innumerable memories of the years they had spent together all appeared to blend into a cloud of bittersweetness. Amy was aware that ending their marriage was a difficult decision, but it was undertaken with hope for peace and healing. Peace, however, proved elusive. Previously hopeful conversations had devolved into quiet standoffs behind closed doors. Unspoken words reverberated more loudly than any disagreement. Then the night arrived, shattering the brittle silence. Whispers echoed across the once quiet valley as neighbors were drawn to their doorsteps by the red and blue lights outside the farmhouse. The arrest of Chris Marek was a surprise to everyone. After a furious argument got out of hand, the police were summoned. This would damage the family's reputation and put their once unbreakable relationships to the test. As word spread, family members came, some in disbelief, some in shock. Tension was in the air as Zach Roloff, protective and enraged, faced Chris with a mixture of disappointment and rage. The once fatherly figure was now a representation of chaos. Chris's pleadings and denials felt insignificant in light of the arrest, which further widened the gap that was widening between the Roloff family. Amy found it difficult to remain composed in the midst of the confusion. She struggled with a range of emotions, including anxiety for her children, anger over the harm done, and sadness over the lost love. Her discussions with Molly exposed the unfiltered vulnerability that lay beneath her calm facade. "How can we do the picking up?" Molly asked softly, a sliver of hope in her voice. Amy's response was straightforward but packed with truth. The only way ahead was to be honest, no matter how painful it was. The judicial proceedings took place in chilly courtrooms, distant from roll-off farms' bucolic surroundings. Attorneys battled over assets, custody, and the complex web of feelings that neither cash nor documents could completely resolve. Chris's imprisonment created a lasting impression, making things more difficult and adding to the already somber mood. The divorce's finality simply signaled the start of a new, uncertain battle. It did not bring closure. Nevertheless, the family looked for fleeting moments of bonding. An uncertain and strained dinner party came to represent their wish to mend. Ever the pragmatic, Matt Roloff reminded everyone of their common past and the value of staying united even during tense times. Despite the suffering, Amy's family was reminded that they were united by more than just dispute by her quiet strength in that situation. The Roloff family faced an uncertain future as the sun sank behind the far-off hills, leaving the property covered in lengthy shadows. Even though they were damaged and bruised in some places, the resilient and enduring spirit of family glowed like the last glimmer of daylight. Their life's narrative was far from ended, and they were getting closer to whatever was ahead with each challenging step. Amy's strength and silence. The farm is still covered in mist when Amy gets up early. The house seems more empty than before. Memories are whispered in every nook and cranny. Peaceful time spent with Chris, hopes for the future, and laughter at the breakfast table. Those echoes feel like ghosts now, though. Folded on the kitchen counter, the divorce papers represent both loss and freedom. Amy struggles with grief and hope, relief and guilt. Late into the night, she writes letters to herself, Chris, and her kids that she might never mail. She believes, "We survived so much, but survival isn't always enough." Her love for her family motivates her to maintain their emotional unity, even in the event of a divorce. Zach's anger and pain. Zach is shocked by what is taking place. He has always admired the strength of his parents and their close-knit family. The arrest of Chris Marek feels like a betrayal of trust, as well as the law. Confusion and rage clash when he meets Chris. How could his father have let him get into this? Zach struggles with emotions he hardly comprehends, which manifests itself in yelling fights, tears, and nights spent pacing the farm's fields. He feels unable to stop the family's public disintegration and worries that it may hurt his younger siblings. The man behind the headlines. Chris Marek. Chris battles his personal issues behind the headlines and flashing cameras. His arrest was the culmination of years of stress and quiet, not merely a case of bad judgment. He is frustrated by how easily everyone turned against him and feels misunderstood. Chris considers what he has lost while incarcerated, surrounded by strangers and chilly walls. His wife, his family's trust, and possibly his own sense of self. He questions whether he can be saved or if he is destined to be used as a scapegoat by the family. Molly's wish during the storm. Molly sees her family fall apart, yet she doesn't give up. She contacts her mother and gives encouragement and support. In her quiet times, she imagines family get-togethers where there is laughing rather than tears, and she dreams of healing and reconciliation. Molly acts as a link across generations, promoting candidness and candid dialogue. She thinks that love can be the thread that binds broken things back together. Matt's appeal for cooperation. Ever the patriarch of the family, Matt Roloff finds it difficult to maintain harmony. In an attempt to remind everyone of their common history and destiny, he arranges a family meal. There are tense grins, tentative discussions, and strong emotional undertones throughout the unpleasant evening. Matt's message is straightforward but impactful. Family transcends mistakes and adversity. For the sake of their kids, the farm, and themselves, they must find a way to move forward together in spite of the sorrow. Court cases and fresh starts, tense negotiations over assets and custody set the stage for the courtroom drama. Every step of the family's intimate hardships is captured on camera and featured in the media. Even after the divorce is finalized, the emotional scars remain. In the midst of the turmoil, Amy starts to imagine another life, one in which she can start again, reinvent herself, and bring harmony to her kids. She is assured that she will bravely traverse the uncertain route. Amy's strength in silence. Amy Roloff stepped out onto the porch and found Roloff Farms enveloped in a gentle gray embrace of the early morning mist. The only sounds in the quiet universe were the faint crowing of a rooster and the distant rustle of leaves. The fields were brushed with a delicate warmth as the sun's first golden rays appeared over the horizon. However, Amy felt a chill that was greater than the morning chill. She could no longer feel the busy bustle of family life and laughing in the house behind her. The quiet was overwhelming. Every recognizable creak of the floors beneath her feet brought back memories of peaceful discussions over coffee, the commotion of kids playing, and Chris's calm voice providing solace after exhausting days. But like sand, those moments had fled from her grasp. She looked at the window in the kitchen. The divorce papers were neatly folded on the counter inside, a sobering reminder that the chapter she had battled to keep closed was now over. The signatures were authentic, and the ink was dried. The idea that the guy she had fought alongside, loved, and built a life with was now legally divorced from her made Amy's heart constrict. She brushed away the tears that came to her eyes, determined to be strong. For the children who still required her constant presence, as much as for herself. Being the anchor when the storm threatened to carry them all away was a burden that weighed heavily on her shoulders. Amy made her way to the ancient wooden bench beneath the sweeping oak tree as the sun rose higher. Years of hopes, prayers, and truths whispered in solitude were recorded in the worn pages of her journal, which she took out. She started writing. Words flowed freely and uncensored, letters never intended to be sent. "I'm exhausted," she wrote. "However, I'm not broken. We've weathered storms before. Although this grief is distinct and more intense, it won't define who we are." Her pen hesitated. She considered Chris, his past self, his current self, and the uncertain future that awaited him. Bitterness had no place here, just the silent faith that these broken fragments could be repaired. Amy shut her journal and turned to face the fields. Home would always be on the farm. She was still here, ready to fight, to love, and to forge a new future despite having been beaten by heartbreak. Zach's anger and pain standing at the edge of the orchard on the farm. Zach Roloff felt the weight of the day bearing down on him like the hot summer air. He felt as though everything he believed to be true about his family had been rocked by the news of Chris Marek's imprisonment. The man who had been a constant in his life during his early years, a source of support and direction, was now at the center of a controversy that threatened to destroy them. His claws dug into his palms as his fists clenched at his sides. He was filled with raw, unyielding anger. Beneath the anger, however, lay a more profound and agonizing feeling, hurt. He was hurt that the family he had always relied on was breaking up so violently and in such a public way. That the person he had trusted the most could go so far damaged him. He was overcome with memories of Chris's comforting hand on his shoulder during difficult times, their quiet conversations in the barn, and their shared humor under the stars. Now those times seemed far away, almost like a terrible joke. Desperate to make sense of the pandemonium, Zach's mind raced. Confrontation was inevitable that night. Zach's voice wavered with a mixture of anger and incredulity as he faced Chris. How did this happen? His eyes searching for answers that would never come, he demanded. Zach's frustration increased as a result of Chris's defensive responses, which felt like walls closing in. Later that night, Zach paced under the stars in the remoteness of the farm's fields, struggling with his mixed feelings. The idea that his younger siblings would suffer as a result of the family's disintegration stung him more than any dispute. Though it felt unattainable at the moment, he yearned for the family harmony he had always valued. In the midst of the chaos, Zach came to the important realization that he couldn't solve the problem by himself. However, he made a private pledge to remain strong, to defend those he loved, and to face whatever lay ahead with courage and resolve. Although the future remained uncertain, giving up was not an option. Behind the headlines, the man Chris Marek felt as though he was trapped inside the clean, frigid walls of the holding cell. His uncertainties and regrets swirled with the shadows created by the harsh fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Chris felt the weight of 1,000 silent accusations strangling him as he was arrested, handcuffed, and branded in front of the public's critical eyes and flashing cameras. He repeatedly relived the events leading up to that evening in his memory, trying to pinpoint the pivotal moment, the precise instant when he lost control. Like a storm poised to erupt, years of unspoken annoyance, stress, and unresolved anguish had accumulated beneath the surface. The altercation that had gotten out of hand wasn't a singular episode. Rather, it was the rupture of a long-standing barrier. Chris struggled with a deep sense of loss, both of his identity and of his freedom. The man who used to be Amy's partner, the father figure to the kids, and the man he was now seemed like a faraway stranger. He felt misinterpreted and constrained by a narrative that presented only one side of the issue. Chris reflected on the family he had wounded throughout the chilly evenings of his captivity. Zach's astonishment and rage, Amy's disappointment in her eyes, and the hushed talks he could no longer hear. The thought that he might have turned into the antagonist in a novel he never intended to write tormented him. However, beneath the sorrow, there was a glimmer of something else, a frantic desire to regain whatever dignity he could, an opportunity to make amends, and a hope for redemption. He questioned whether it was possible to forgive himself, the family, and a society that had already started to turn its back on him. Chris held on to that shaky hope as the days blended together. He had nothing else. Molly's wish during the storm. Molly Roloff saw how everything around her changed and fell apart like a delicate deck of cards. The unquestionable tension, the hushed discussions, and the headlines all felt too much to handle. But even though her family was in disarray, she resisted allowing hopelessness to consume her. She held on to the tenacious, silent faith that love may still mend the wounds somewhere underneath the suffering and bewilderment. As the golden sunlight filtered through the foliage like a gentle promise, she spent lengthy afternoons strolling over the farm's well-known routes. Every breath was an appeal for calm. Every stride felt like a prayer. The farm was more than simply land and structures. It was her family's legacy and the foundation upon which everything else rested. Molly could see her mother's anguish, her father's reserved melancholy, and her elder brother Zach's barely disguised rage. However, she also perceived strength, quiet, unsaid power that kept them going when things seemed unclear. During their private talks, Molly became a rock of support for Amy. She offered support and understanding while listening without passing judgment. She urged her mom to talk openly and to share the load rather than bear it alone. She gently reminded her that we don't need to be flawless. We simply must be honest. In an effort to heal the widening gaps, Molly also made contact with her siblings. She missed the awkward silences and tentative looks that characterized family gatherings. She firmly felt that the Roloffs could reconcile if they were prepared to accept the truth and extend forgiveness to one another. Molly's hope glowed in the midst of the tempest, like a tiny candle burning in the darkness. Yes, it was brittle, but it was there, a silent assurance that love could still be the glue holding torn hearts together even in the face of adversity. Matt's appeal for cooperation. Matt Roloff was more affected than most by the disintegration of his family. Being the head of the household, and the one who had guided generations through hardships and victories on the farm, he was aware of how brittle ties can become. He was deeply saddened by the growing distance between Zach, Amy, Chris, and the rest of the family, but he was also resolute. He was aware that action was required because time alone would not mend the scars. In order to remind everyone of who they were despite the suffering and the news, he hosted a family supper. A tight calm pervaded the farmhouse, which had previously been alive with warmth and laughter as family members filed in, their eyes cautious, their emotions stiff. Unspoken complaints and unsure hopes were in the air. Smiles were courteous but brittle, and small conversation felt forced. Matt could feel each person's defensive walls and vulnerability. However, he also noticed the glimmer of love behind it all, a thread that may start to reunite them if it were carefully tugged. Matt's voice was forceful but calm as he spoke. He brought to memory their common past, including the farm they had tended, the hardships they had surmounted, and the legacy they had left behind. He called them back to something bigger than their suffering rather than placing blame or condemnation on them. Family was messy, complex, and even heartbreaking. It was not flawless. However, it was also a haven of safety, second chances, and unwavering affection. Matt encouraged them to set aside their disagreements, listen empathetically, open their hearts, and choose healing over separation. Some nodded softly around the table, tears sparkling in long-guarded eyes. Others kept quiet as they struggled with their own insecurities and scars. However, there was a glimmer of optimism at the time, a hesitant move in the direction of reconciliation. Conversations became softer as the evening went on. After a long winter, hesitant and bashful laughter emerged like a delicate flower. While it wasn't a panacea, Matt's appeal for unity was a beginning. Additionally, in some families, getting started was crucial. Court cases and fresh starts, although the antiseptic courthouse hallways seemed worlds away from the undulating roll-off farms fields, the family's destiny was being shaped within those walls with icy, uncompromising accuracy. The days were filled with custody agreements, divorce documents, and legalese, which transformed intensely personal suffering into formal disputes. In addition to sadness, the once close family was now split by legally intractable barriers. With the burden of the previous years bearing down on her, Amy sat in silence in the courtroom. Every negotiation felt like another crack in the brittle prospect of peace, and every hearing revived old wounds. The procedures were clouded by Chris's arrest, which made custody negotiations more difficult and raised doubts about any chance of a peaceful conclusion. While the media swarmed like vultures, anxious to transform private suffering into public spectacle, lawyers battled over parenting plans and property lines. Once associated with unity and tenacity, the roll-off brand today carried the burden of scandal and unfulfilled promises. Amy, however, found a glimmer of resolve in the midst of the confusion. The divorce signaled not only a conclusion but also a start, an opportunity to take back control of her life and her children's lives. She became stronger and more determined with each legal battle. Even if the family's composition had altered, the farm would still be a haven of safety and continuity. Conversations outside the courtroom started to change. Unbroken but scarred, the family gradually looked for new ways to bond. The will to move on and redefine what family meant to them became the thread, weaving a tentative new tapestry, even though old wounds would take time to heal. Amy thought of evenings of real connection around the dinner table, days full of laughter again, and kids racing around the fields. It was her responsibility to take the unpredictable and difficult route with grace, bravery, and an open heart to whatever lay ahead. Let us know in the comments. And stay tuned by subscribe to our channel to get more updates like this. Thank you, bye guys.